We have seen that you can pretty easily turn a Dell OptiPlex small form factor office PC into a gaming PC by installing a single slot low profile graphics card. Or even better yet, we also saw that you can put in a more powerful dual slot low profile graphics card in if you install a more powerful and smaller flex PSU. While these options work well, they are missing something for a gaming PC because they don't look like gaming PCs. As we all know, RGB makes your gaming PC faster, so let's put this Dell OptiPlex small form factor PC into a gaming PC case. Oh, and the cooling will also be a lot better. But that's not as important as RGB though. So here is our Dell OptiPlex small form factor 5070, and despite its name, it obviously does not have an RTX 5070 in it. We're going to be swapping this case for the MSI gaming case, which seems pretty simple on paper, but Dell has done some weird stuff to the motherboard, which makes it actually a little more difficult. As you can see, I've recently updated my desk setup with this nice mahogany coloured standing desk from FlexiSpot. It's been a really great upgrade for me as I record videos while standing up, and having the ability to adjust the height within a large range makes it great for recording any video. I often spend long amounts of time editing videos, and having the ability to choose between standing and sitting has vastly improved my posture as I'm not sitting down hunched over all the time. I chose the FlexiSpot E7 premium standing desk because it's very reasonably priced compared to the other alternatives out there, but it also is of very high quality. It can easily lift some of the heaviest gaming PCs that I own, while also being very stable even when gaming. Adjusting the height of the desk is very smooth, and I can even put this graphics card on its side and then adjust the desk without it even tipping over. Be sure to check out FlexiSpot's website to view the E7 Premium Standing Desk. And you don't want to miss their Black Friday and Cyber Day sales where you can get up to 80% off and have the chance to get your order 100% for free. Additionally, you can also use the coupon code YTE730 to get $30 off, and there are special discounts for students, teachers, military, and so on. FlexiSpot provides all kinds of standing desks and ergonomic chairs to meet your demands. Shop now, and if you like it, leave a note saying GPU specs at checkout, and also don't forget to use the code YTE730 for $30 off. Okay, so in order to case swap our Dell OptiPlex small form factor PC, we're going to need a fair few things. The first is this 24-pin to 6-pin Dell power adapter because Dell uses a proprietary power connector for the motherboard. You can pick these up on AliExpress for like $1. The second is a graphics card because we actually want this to be a gaming PC. The good news is that we are no longer limited to low-profile graphics cards, which is amazing because I picked up this RTX 2070 Super for about £130, and that's about $170. If you're in the US, I've seen loads on eBay for $150 or less. This GPU therefore costs less than the RTX 3050 low profile, and it's also less than half the price of the RTX 5060 low profile. But as we will soon see, the performance is higher than the 3050 and only slightly lower than the 5060. We also of course need a gaming PC case. I chose this MSI M100R Micro ATX case because it was pretty cheap. It's an Amazon resale item, so only cost me £30 or about $40. But honestly, it looks brand new. Then we're going to need a power supply. I chose a 650 watt PSU because our GPU requires a fair amount of power. This MSI power supply is kind of just average in terms of quality, but it's still fairly cheap at £45 or $58. You can probably save a lot here if you find a used PSU or find a cheaper unit. We're going to need to use a drill with a fairly small drill bit. I'm using a 3mm bit, and that's to create holes for our motherboard because Dell's motherboard has screw holes in weird positions that we need to change. Dell's small form factor PCs usually have the front I/O panel built onto the motherboard itself. That means we have no USB front panel connectors. In order to fix this, we need this adapter which lets us plug in a USB 3.0 port at the front and then convert it to the USB 3.0 header. We also have the exact same thing for the USB 2.0. I'm going to use a Sata to 4-way fan adapter. This is going to allow us to connect all our fans in the PC case. You may also need an RGB hub, but in this case it already includes one. If you have PWM fans, you probably shouldn't use the Sata adapter as the fans will just run at 100% speed all the time. The fans in this case are only 3 pins, so it actually doesn't matter for me, and each of these adapters only costs like a couple dollars each on AliExpress. The final thing you may need is a CPU cooler. One of those stock Intel type ones work really well as they have the plastic clips. Otherwise you need a backplate. You can use the same Dell cooler, but you will still need a backplate as the mounting part is attached to the old Dell PC case. Let's begin swapping the Dell OptiPlex's PC case. First we will remove the old PSU. I've still got the Flex PSU inside of here from another video, so it's pretty easy to remove. But if you have the normal PSU, you would just unscrew it and then slide it out. You will need to remove the disk drive and unplug that. And then you also need to unplug the 24-pin and 4-pin connectors from the PSU. Make sure you also unplug anything else in the way like the speaker, and then I'm just going to unscrew any screw that I can pretty much see, including the CPU cooler M.2 standoff screw that I initially forgot to remove. front panel shield also comes off with a screw, and there's also this VGA port that you need to remove. If you removed all the screws, then it should come out pretty easily. Now I'm going to unplug the useless stuff like the case intrusion switch and the ribbon cable for the VGA port. And that's pretty much it. We're going to start reassembling again. I'm going to use this cheap CPU cooler because it has plastic clips and doesn't need a backplate. It costs about £1 or £2 I think. Only problem is I lost the pins that hold it in place. So I'm just going to use a wooden stick instead, and I mean it literally does the same thing. So I'm just going to jam that in there before adding our thermal paste and heatsink. And now that is attached on really well and it's not coming off. I'm going to put the motherboard into the case, and of course none of the standoffs and screw holes actually line up because it's a Dell motherboard. So I'm going to have to make my own holes using a drill. I'm going to use a standoff tool to remove all the motherboard standoffs that are already installed in the case. If you don't have a standoff tool, then you can also use a pair of pliers to unscrew the standoffs. Now I'll remove the PCIe expansion slot cover and put my motherboard in along with our graphics card. We can quite clearly see that our GPU should be taking up the two middle slots, and of course the slot above it is for the PCIe X4 slot. So I'll bend those two out of the way and place our motherboard with the GPU back in. Then I'm going to screw down the GPU and hold the motherboard in the correct position. Using a screwdriver, I marked a few locations of the screw holes. Not all the screw holes can be screwed in, as if the case dips down in that part, then you won't be able to get a screw in. I managed to get 4 screw holes marked, which should be enough to hold down our motherboard very securely. Now we're just going to take everything out and we're going to start drilling with a 3mm bit into the holes that we marked. Make sure there's nothing on the other side of the case like an RGB hub or cable before you start drilling, as that will be pretty bad. And as you can now see, these are our new holes, some of which are very close to the original standoff holes. Now we'll get our standoff tool again and screw in the motherboard standoffs into the holes we created. I initially screwed in the motherboard, but I realised that these front panel USB adapters are not going to plug in due to the limited space from the fans. So I made sure to plug those in first, and there was just about enough space to get the motherboard in. I think really these USB plugs need to be like right angled, but I don't think I've seen any of those about. You may notice that there are 2 USB 3.0 cables, and that's because the header can utilize up to 2 USB 3.0 ports. But on the Dell OptiPlex front panel there is only one USB 3.0 and one USB-C port. For me it doesn't affect me as my case only supports one USB 3.0 port anyway, so I only need to connect one of these cables, but it's pretty much a guess to which one I should connect. If it's not this one, then I'll have to go back and plug in the other connector instead. If your case has 2 USB 3.0 ports, then you can use a USB-C to USB adapter and then plug in this adapter. Or you might be able to try that card reader port on the motherboard, although I've heard it may not work. So now we just need to align our motherboard up and screw it in. I'm going to attach back on this Sata cable so I can connect my SSD while being a bit neater. This PC actually came with a 256GB NVMe SSD, but I'm going to use my own because I already have Windows and games installed on it. We can then install our RTX 2070 Super with 2560 CUDA cores, 8GB of GDDR6 memory, a boost clock of 1785MHz, PCI Express 3.0 x16, which is actually very good for this PC as it only supports PCIe 3.0 x16, and we also have a TDP of 215 watts, which is pretty high, and that's why we need a fairly high wattage PSU. For I/O we have 3 display ports and 1 HDMI, so we'll just get that installed by plugging it in and then screwing it in. Now we're going to install a power supply. It's very straightforward, we're just going to put the fan in face down and then we're going to screw it in with 4 screws. Then we move on to the fun part. We have to plug in everything within this mess of cables. I'm going to start with the Dell 24-pin to 6-pin power adapter. Plug that into the 24-pin and then the other side into the motherboard. The 4-pin CPU connector goes in at the top. I'm going to leave the 8-pin CPU connector as a block, and then I'm going to plug in half of it just to make it look a bit cleaner. The GPU power I'm going to route through the bottom and then plug in using one cable only, which should be fine. Probably. I mean, it's literally all we have on this PSU, so there's not much you can do about it. Here I plug in the RGB hub to the SATA power, and another SATA power goes into our adapter, which then connects to all the case fans. Our front panel USB connectors need to connect to the adapters that we plugged in the front of the Dell motherboard. Funnily enough, the adapter pins on the USB 2.0 weren't even in the correct position. From what I understand, that last pin, which is in the incorrect position, has no connection anyway, so I just decided to move it with a screwdriver and move the pin into the one below. Now it plugs in successfully, but I gotta hope that the other pins are actually in the correct position. Luckily, the USB 3.0 power adapter had no problems plugging in. The power button, reset button, and so on, I'm going to route that through the front where the Dell power button was. The power button goes into the 2 furthest right pins vertically. Then the power LED negative goes into the top middle pin, and the power LED positive goes into the bottom left pin. The reset switch and the hard drive LED we can't really plug in anywhere, and the same goes for the HD audio connector, which means the front audio jack won't work. I haven't been able to find an adapter for that yet. we're pretty much more or less done, so I'm going to try and tidy up some of the mess of cables. And it's definitely not the cleanest with the random color cables coming out of everywhere, but that PSU enclosure does hide most of it from view. But does the PC actually work? Well, as soon as we turn on the power switch on the PSU, the fans and everything spin up. This is due to the Dell 24-pin power adapter that we're using, but as you can see, it only boots up when we actually press the power button in. We get a message about the power button, and that's because we don't have something to connect it to that bottom middle pin. You can easily just skip past this message, so it's fine. I connected my keyboard and mouse directly to the front panel USBs, and it actually does work to my surprise. All 3 of them. We can also see the light is on, so it's all looking good and it's all working as expected. The RGB button at the front also works to change the color of the fans. We now have a pretty cheap Dell OptiPlex small form factor gaming PC with an Intel Core i5-9500, 16GB of 2666MHz DDR4 RAM, an RTX 2070 Super, a 650W PSU, and a 256GB SSD if we kept the original in and I wasn't using my benchmark drive. So let's go ahead and test out some games. In 3D Mark, we get a graphics score of 9484 and a total score of 8434. To put that into perspective, we only got 4717 graphics score with the 3050 and 13187 with the RTX 5060. But obviously the RTX 5060 costs more than twice the price, so it would be a bit better. GTA 5 at the highest settings 1080p achieved 108.2 FPS. The RTX 5060 only got slightly higher at 113.9 FPS. Even at 1440p, the RTX 2070 Super still gets 102.9 FPS on average, and the 1% and 0.1% lows were at 75 and 68.1 FPS. Where the difference becomes noticeable is with MSA x8. The 5060 gets 78.8, but the 2070 Super only gets 56.4 FPS. However, that's still much higher than the RTX 3050, and the temperatures are much better at just 75 degrees C at the maximum, compared to like 85 degrees on the 5060 and 3050. This results in the PC being a lot quieter, even with our 3-pin fans. Red Dead Redemption 2 at ultra settings 1080p achieved 50.5 FPS. The FPS didn't dip below the 40 FPS range at 1080p, so it was very playable. At 1440p, the FPS decreased slightly to 46.9, and the 0.1% low was at 19.1 FPS, but it still felt very smooth throughout. Shadow of the Tomb Raider at the highest preset 1080p got 79.2 FPS. The 0.1% low was at 42.3, so it was very smooth. At 1440p, we had a slight drop in FPS to 70.9, but the 1% and 0.1% lows pretty much stayed the same in the 40 FPS range. So like all the other games we're going to test here, the RTX 2070 Super performed slightly worse than the RTX 5060, but quite a bit better than the RTX 3050. Forza Horizon 5 at ultra settings 1080p got 101.2 FPS, and it got 84.8 FPS at 1440p. We could easily turn this up to the extreme preset as our FPS is pretty high. This game was very playable as our 1% and 0.1% lows were at 71 and 65.7 respectively at 1440p. Resident Evil 3 at very high settings got 134.3 FPS on average at 1080p, and 94.2 FPS at 1440p. The game did dip fairly low at times, as shown by the 0.1% low being 34.6 for 1080p, but overall it was still a great experience. Cyberpunk at high settings 1080p achieved 79.7 FPS, so we can put this onto Ultra instead and get 71 FPS. At 1440p Ultra, our FPS decreases by quite a bit to 44.5, and turning on the Ray Tracing Ultra preset with no resolution scaling at 1080p makes the FPS dip a bit too low to 28.4 FPS. Esports titles like CS2 work great at the high preset at 1440p with 135.3 FPS. So overall, is the Dell OptiPlex small form factor case swap worth it? Well, it costs about $400 in total, which does seem a bit high, although the PC has some fairly decent specs. I feel like you can probably find a lot of these components like the PSU and GPU for cheaper, especially if you're looking for used components. You also have to remember that there are a lot of parts we took off from the old Dell PC, like the PSU, which can be sold on again to make the PC a bit cheaper. If you already have a Dell OptiPlex PC and want to convert it into a gaming PC, then a case swap is very useful as you can use any full-size graphics card. I don't think I would buy a Dell OptiPlex small form factor specifically to turn it into a gaming PC, because the Dell motherboard has some pretty annoying features like the power button and the fact that the fans are always on when the power is connected. You could probably shop around and build something for a similar price or even less that doesn't use a Dell motherboard, and then you won't need to drill your PC case or have some of the front panel stuff not working. Thanks for watching.